Patricia willed a massive office. Two little girls sat cross-legged on the plush carpet. Their golden curls caught the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, their crystal blue eyes fixed intently on the dolls they cradled. There was no giggling, no cooing, no murmured conversation, only a perfect, unnatural silence. Patricia paused mid-step, her instincts pricking at her like tiny needles. She had seen children with hearing difficulties before, children who navigated the world in quietude, but something about these girls, Emma and Sophie, struck her as oddly deliberate. Their movements were delicate, almost orchestrated, their lips occasionally curling in micro-gestures to one another, as if exchanging secrets in an invisible language. "Don't worry." I stepped out of the elevator onto the 40th floor of the Manning Corporation with a sense of quiet anticipation. The polished marble gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. She had cleaned offices before, high-profile offices where silence and precision were a part of the daily rhythm, but nothing had prepared her for the tension that hung like a thick fog in the executive suite ahead. With her cleaning cart softly rolling behind her, she pushed open the double-glass doors and immediately felt the oppressive stillness pressing in. In the corner of about her, a deep voice said from behind a massive mahogany desk. Patricia turned to see Richard Manning, the billionaire CEO, his posture stiff, his eyes glued to the documents in front of him. He barely acknowledged her presence, as though she were an interruption in a well-rehearsed performance rather than a human being standing in his office. "Emma and Sophie have been deaf since birth, completely deaf. Just do your job." His voice was calm, almost clinical, but Patricia could sense the usury. Their current of impatience, a man accustomed to controlling every variable in his world, including these children. Patricia nodded, her fingers tightening on the handle of her cart as she quietly began to arrange her cleaning supplies. She moved slowly, observing every detail, the slight tilt of Sophie's head when the vacuum hummed past, Emma's tiny frown when Richard tapped his pen against the desk. These reactions were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet they struck Patricia with a quiet jolt of disbelief. Children who had been deaf since birth would not respond to such stimuli, not like this. Her mind flashed back to her own adolescence, the long nights spent teaching her younger brother to communicate through sign language, learning to interpret the smallest flickers of movement, the tiniest shift in expression. Patricia's heart tightened as she watched the girls, her training and experience whispering a dangerous thought she dared not voice aloud. They weren't completely deaf. As she continued her work, Patricia allowed herself a brief glance at the man behind the desk. Richard Manning's eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was a coldness there, an emotional disconnect that made her stomach churn. He treated his daughters as inconveniences, as items to be managed and controlled rather than children to be nurtured and loved. Every gesture he made was precise, disciplined, and devoid of warmth. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. There was something deeply wrong here. When Emma's doll fell slightly to the side and the twins' eyes flickered toward the sound, Patricia's pulse quickened. The movement was tiny, but to her trained eyes, it screamed possibility. The room, bathed in sunlight and the illusion of normalcy, suddenly felt like a stage set for a deception. Patricia took a careful step forward, her voice a whisper to herself. Something isn't right. For the first time that morning, the silent girls glanced at her, their expressions curious, cautious, almost hopeful. Patricia froze, recognizing a spark in their eyes that mirrored a secret she had spent her life learning to detect. And in that instant, she understood. What she had stumbled upon was not just a cleaning job. It was a puzzle, a mystery with stakes higher than any office protocol, and she was about to become the unlikely witness and the catalyst to a truth that someone powerful wanted buried forever. The silence of the office pressed in once more, but Patricia no longer heard it as stillness. She heard it as a challenge, a whisper of what might be hidden just beneath the surface. And she knew, with a certainty that made her heart pound, that her life, and the lives of these girls, was about to change forever. Patricia returned the next morning with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the subtle signs of life hidden behind silence. The elevator doors opened, and the familiar scent of polished wood and antiseptic greeted her. But today, there was a new tension in the air, almost like the building itself was holding its breath. She pushed her cart down the pristine corridor, her eyes scanning the office for the first hints of her small, elusive subjects. In the corner of the room, Emma and Sophie were already at play, their dolls lined up as if awaiting orders from some invisible director. Patricia crouched behind a low desk, pretending to wipe dust while observing them with precision. Her heart tightened as she noticed the way Sophie's shoulders twitched when a distant phone rang, and how Emma's eyes followed the flicker of a passing shadow, as if the world spoke to them in ways no one else could hear. Her mind raced. Children born deaf did not respond like this. Something was being hidden. The office door opened, and Helen, the older caregiver, swept in with the exaggerated precision of someone who had rehearsed every gesture. "Don't make a mess," she said, moving her lips slowly, her hands gesturing with a deliberate slowness that seemed to mock normal conversation. "Daddy doesn't like it when you make noise." Her voice was soft, almost syrupy, but there was an unmistakable edge of control that made Patricia's stomach knot. The twins responded with hesitant, careful movements of their hands, signs that Helen either did not understand or intentionally ignored. Patricia's pulse quickened. She had seen this before, not in children who were deaf, but in children forced into silence. Her mind went back to her brother Kevin, misdiagnosed and isolated, left to believe he could never hear, never speak, until someone finally saw through the lie. A memory of years spent pleading with doctors, convincing her family to seek a second opinion, flooded back, and she felt the old fire stir inside her. These girls, these bright, curious little souls, were trapped in a similar prison, and she was the first adult who could see beyond the carefully constructed illusion. While Helen busied herself with arranging toys and monitoring the twins, Patricia carefully dropped a small coin near the girls, far enough away that it would not vibrate the floor, but close enough to produce a distinct sound. The reaction was instantaneous. Emma's head tilted almost imperceptibly toward the noise, her eyes flicking with a mixture of curiosity and alarm. Patricia held her breath, pretending to adjust a stack of papers while her mind cataloged every detail. This was not the behavior of a child born deaf. It was the reaction of someone who could hear but had been trained, perhaps coerced, to suppress it. "Interesting," Patricia murmured to herself, careful not to draw attention. Richard Manning's voice, cold and measured, floated over from behind the massive desk. "What's interesting?" Patricia's lips curved into a practiced, casual smile. "Nothing, sir. Just admiring how beautiful she is." But even as she spoke, she knew the stakes had changed. These were no ordinary children, and Richard Manning was no ordinary father. The subtle panic in the twins' eyes whenever they glanced at the cameras in the room, the deliberate over-control by Helen, the strange, almost imperceptible reactions to everyday sounds. All of it painted a picture Patricia had seen before. Children forced into silence for reasons that were both cruel and calculated. She watched them as they played, noting the rhythm in which they moved, the coordinated gestures that were never fully explained by any sign language she had learned. They were communicating in a private world that no one else was allowed to enter. And for the first time, Patricia felt the quiet surge of purpose that would guide every step she took from now on. She knew she had to proceed carefully. One wrong move, one careless word, and the fragile hope in those bright blue eyes could shatter forever. But there was no turning back. These girls were capable of more than anyone had allowed them to be, and Patricia was determined to uncover the truth. The air in the room seemed to thrum with possibility, a silent promise that the next few hours, and the days to come, would change everything. As she finished cleaning a small shelf and stood to straighten a picture frame, Patricia allowed herself a quiet glance at the twins. Their eyes met hers for a fleeting second, and she saw something she would never forget. A spark of recognition, of hope, and perhaps a silent plea for someone to finally believe them. In that instant, Patricia understood. The game had begun, and she was the only one equipped to play it. Patricia's determination grew with every step she took into the twins' world. That afternoon, while the office hums on, and with the distant noise of phones and keyboards, she positioned herself near the corner where Emma and Sophie sat. Their dolls were carefully arranged as if performing a silent ballet, yet there was a tension in their tiny bodies that made Patricia's chest tighten. Every tilt of a head, every subtle shift in posture, screamed of children who were aware, who were listening, even if the rest of the world insisted they couldn't. Helen, the older caregiver, hovered close by, her exaggerated gestures and slow lip movements a thinly veiled method of control. "Careful, Emma. Careful, Sophie," she chanted softly, moving her lips with deliberate slowness, as though the girls were incapable of understanding anything faster. Patricia's eyes narrowed. She had worked with children who had genuine hearing challenges, and she knew this was not therapy. It was manipulation, conditioning, a way to enforce silence. Her gut clenched with anger, and she realized the stakes were far higher than she had initially imagined. As she pretended to dust a nearby shelf, Patricia decided to test the boundaries. She deliberately knocked a small metal object onto the floor. The clatter echoed lightly, enough to make a sound distinct from floor vibrations. Emma's head jerked slightly toward the noise, her wide eyes darting around as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. Sophie's tiny lips twitched, forming a shape Patricia recognized from her years of study, an attempt to verbalize, to respond, but immediately suppressed. Patricia's heart pounded. Children born deaf did not react like this. These subtle cues, the micro-expressions of alarm and confusion, spoke volumes. Someone had deliberately silenced them, convinced them they could not hear, that their world was meant to be muted. And the person orchestrating it had power, immense power. "Can you hear me?" Patricia whispered under her being. "Wreath," her voice barely audible, pretending to adjust a stack of files. Both girls froze, their wide eyes snapping to her. For a fleeting moment, their faces softened, a whisper of relief passing between them. Emma's hand twitched in a small, almost imperceptible gesture toward her lips, a silent warning, while Sophie's fingers hovered in the air, yearning to respond. The realization hit Patricia like a thunderclap. The girls had been forced into deception, trained to pretend to be something they were not. And the architect of this cruelty was the man sitting just across the room, Richard Manning, billionaire CEO, father and enforcer of a cruel illusion. She felt a chill creep up her spine as she considered the implications. This was no longer a matter of misdiagnosis or neglect. It was deliberate psychological imprisonment. Patricia's mind raced through possibilities. How long had this been going on? How many other children had been trapped in silence by the schemes of adults who claimed to know what was best? Her gaze flicked to the cameras positioned in the corners of the room, the silent witnesses to every micro-movement of the girls. Whoever had set this up had ensured constant surveillance, control at every turn. Yet for the first time, Patricia felt the stirrings of hope. These girls were not truly powerless. They responded, they reacted, and most importantly, someone had noticed. The wrong person perhaps, but someone who could change everything. She moved a little closer, crouching beside the twins' small circle. "It's okay," she whispered softly, careful to keep her voice low but steady. "I know you can hear me. I know you've been brave all this time, and I'm here now. I can help you." Emma's eyes widened, a glimmer of trust flickering through the fear that had settled over them like a heavy cloak. Sophie's small hand reached out instinctively, stopping mid-air as if afraid she had already spoken out of turn. Patricia knew in that instant that the game had changed. She could no longer be just the invisible cleaning lady. She had become the keeper of a dangerous secret, the first adult to recognize that these girls had been imprisoned not by fate, but by someone who believed control was more important than love. And as she watched their tiny faces, filled with equal parts fear and hope, she silently vowed that she would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The office felt heavier now, the silence charged with possibility and danger. Patricia's pulse quickened. She understood that revealing the truth would pit her against a man who wielded wealth and influence like a weapon, and that the path ahead was fraught with risk. But there was no turning back. Emma and Sophie had waited long enough for someone to see them, hear them, and believe them. And Patricia Williams was ready to become that someone. The following morning, Patricia arrived at the Manning Corporation an hour early, the soft hum of the elevator accompanying her thoughts like a heartbeat. She had spent the night replaying every movement, every glance, every fleeting expression she had seen in Emma and Sophie. The twins had been more than responsive. They had been communicating in a private, silent language, one that had been painstakingly suppressed. Her chest tightened with a mix of dread and determination. She needed to know the truth, but she had to proceed carefully. The wrong move could undo all the trust she had begun to build. The office door swung open, revealing the familiar sight of Emma and Sophie sitting in their corner, dolls lined up as if ready for a rehearsal. Their eyes flicked toward the sound of Patricia's footsteps, a mixture of curiosity and caution visible in the soft, guarded movements of their tiny bodies. The air was heavy with tension, as if the room itself was aware of the silent stakes at play. Patricia crouched low, organizing her cleaning supplies, pretending to be absorbed in a task, while her eyes never left the twins. Helen, the older caregiver, entered, her presence immediately imposing. "No loud noises," she said in her slow, exaggerated manner, her lips moving as if each word was a carefully measured instruction. "Remember, Daddy doesn't like it." The girls obeyed almost instinctively, their hands pausing mid-gesture, heads tilting slightly in a way that revealed years of conditioned caution. Patricia's stomach churned. The control was deliberate, precise, and cruel. These children had been trained to silence themselves, to betray their own instincts. When Helen stepped away to answer a phone call, Patricia seized the moment. She dropped a small coin on the floor again, deliberately creating a clear sound without producing vibrations. Emma's head turned subtly. Sophie's lips quivered as if attempting a word before pulling back. Patricia's heart raced. The evidence was undeniable. They were not deaf. They had been forced to pretend. Patricia crouched closer, her voice a low whisper. "Can you hear me?" The words barely passed her lips, but the reaction was immediate. Both girls froze, their eyes darting to the corners of the room where cameras lingered like silent sentinels. Emma's small hand came up to her lips, signaling the need for silence, while Sophie's fingers hovered, trembling with the urge to respond. Fear was etched into their movements, but so was recognition. Someone finally saw them. Patricia's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of evidence she had observed. The exaggerated care from the nannies, the subtle responses to sounds, the secret gestures. It all painted a picture of deliberate deception, of a lie enforced by authority. Her gaze fell on Richard, absorbed in his paperwork, his presence looming over every action in the room without needing to intervene directly. The man's obsession with control extended even to his own daughters, using fear as a tool to maintain a narrative of helplessness. She thought of her brother, Kevin, and the years of lost childhood caused by misdiagnosis. The same cruelty that had nearly destroyed him was unfolding here, executed with wealth, influence, and cold calculation. Patricia clenched her fists, the fire of purpose igniting within her. She would not allow this to continue. Quietly, she slipped closer to the twins, careful to avoid detection. "You're safe with me," she murmured. "I know your secret. I see you." Emma's eyes widened, Sophie's lips trembled, and a single tear rolled down Emma's cheek. The girls' silent plea was clear. They were ready for someone to act on their behalf. Patricia swallowed hard, understanding the magnitude of the responsibility. She was no longer merely a cleaning lady. She had become a guardian, a witness, and perhaps the only chance these children had for freedom. As she straightened a picture frame and adjusted a chair, Patricia's thoughts were already forming a plan. She would gather proof, reach out to trusted allies, and expose the lie that had imprisoned these girls in silence. Every instinct in her body screamed urgency. The clock ticked toward Richard's arrival, but Patricia felt no fear for herself, only a protective, unyielding resolve for Emma and Sophie. The moment for action was approaching, and the quiet tension in the room vibrated with the promise of revelations to come. For the first time that day, the twins looked at her not with hesitation, but with hope. And Patricia understood, with a clarity that chilled and inspired her, that she had just taken the first step into a war she could not afford to lose. Patricia spent the rest of the morning carefully observing, her eyes never leaving Emma and Sophie. She noticed the smallest details, the way Sophie flinched when the phone rang, the way Emma's gaze followed the faint hum of the office air conditioning, as if listening for a pattern in the subtle vibrations of sound. Each movement was a breadcrumb, a secret signal of intelligence and awareness that had been painstakingly masked by years of conditioning. The realization pressed down on her chest like a stone. These girls were not only capable, they had been silenced intentionally. When the office cleared for lunch, Patricia seized her moment. She carefully guided the twins into a small, secluded corner of the room, making sure they were out of Helen's line of sight. "I need to ask you something," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "Can you hear me? Really hear me?" Emma and Sophie exchanged a quick, anxious glance. Then Emma nodded ever so slightly, her tiny hands trembling. Sophie mirrored her sister, but fear flashed across her face. They had learned that responding could mean punishment or worse, and the memory of that conditioning was deeply ingrained. Patricia's heart ached for them, for the years stolen by lies and manipulation. She pulled a small toy from her pocket, one that squeaked loudly when pressed. She pressed it gently behind Emma, far enough to ensure it wouldn't vibrate through the floor, but close enough that the sound would reach an attentive ear. Emma's head jerked instantly toward the noise, her blue eyes wide, pupils dilated with recognition. Sophie's lips twitched, forming shapes Patricia recognized from phonics lessons, small attempts at vocalization, quickly retracted, but unmistakable signs of capability. Patricia knelt lower, her voice dropping to a whisper again. "You've been brave all this time, haven't you?" The girls nodded almost imperceptibly. "I know someone made you believe you couldn't hear, that you had to stay quiet, but I see you, and I promise, I will help you." Tears threatened to spill down her cheeks, but she swallowed them, maintaining the calm exterior the girls needed to trust her. She gently asked them to repeat after her, using both spoken words and subtle signs. Emma whispered softly, a voice so fragile it could have been mistaken for imagination. Sophie followed, her voice cracking as it emerged from years of suppression. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of relief, anger, and awe. These children had been trapped in a lie, forced to hide the very essence of their being, yet here they were, their voices finding her, their courage finally breaking through. Patricia realized that exposing the truth would not be easy. Richard's control was extensive, backed by influence, wealth, and a network of professionals who had helped maintain the illusion of deafness. But in that moment, standing in the corner of the grand, polished office, she understood that the first and most critical victory had been achieved. Trust. The girls trusted her, and with that trust came the possibility of liberation. She spent the next hour quietly coaching them, teaching subtle gestures, affirming their voices, reinforcing that they were not powerless. Every small word, every whispered sound was an act of rebellion, a step toward reclaiming their stolen identities. Patricia's mind raced with plans: how to gather evidence, how to reach allies, and how to confront the terrifying reality of the man who had kept them silenced for so long. When Richard returned from his meeting, the office seemed unchanged, ordinary, pristine, but the undercurrent had shifted. Patricia had crossed an invisible line. She now carried a secret so dangerous that the slightest misstep could expose her to his wrath. Yet he felt no fear for herself, only a fierce protective determination for Emma and Sophie. The twins, once silent and resigned, were slowly finding their voices. And Patricia knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that nothing would stop her from seeing this through. For the first time in years, the twins were no longer prisoners of silence, and the quiet war against deception, manipulation, and fear had officially begun. By midweek, Patricia had devised a careful strategy, a delicate balance between observation and action. Every movement she made in the vast, sterile expanse of the 40th floor office was calculated, each step measured so that it would not arouse suspicion. Her cleaning routine became camouflage, a perfect cover for her true mission: uncovering the truth about Emma and Sophie's supposed deafness and gathering proof of the lies that had imprisoned them for years. She started by photographing documents on Richard's desk during moments of distraction: medical reports, care instructions, and even the occasional photograph with smiling doctors whose names were already familiar to her from past cases of misdiagnosis. Each image was a piece of a puzzle, and as she studied them in her apartment that night, a chilling pattern emerged. These girls had not been naturally deaf. Every report was carefully constructed, reinforcing the illusion. Patricia felt a wave of anger mixed with determination. This was deliberate, not neglect. It was manipulation. Her next step involved discreetly testing the twins in ways that would not alert the caregivers or Richard. During a quiet afternoon when the nannies were busy, she approached Emma and Sophie with a simple, soft question: "Do you know you can hear me?" Their initial hesitation betrayed years of conditioning, but Emma's tiny nod and Sophie's trembling hand gesture confirmed her suspicions. Patricia knew that in that moment, trust had been firmly established. They understood she was an ally. The breakthrough came when she introduced a small, subtle challenge. Using a squeaky toy, she tested the girls' responses to sound at various distances and angles. Emma's head tilted sharply toward the noise. Sophie's lips twitched as if forming words, quickly retracting, their fear of punishment still evident. Patricia's heart pounded. The evidence was undeniable. Richard Manning had been keeping his daughters in a carefully constructed illusion of deafness, a cruel, calculated deception. Patricia knew she couldn't confront him directly. Not yet. He was unpredictable, powerful, and obsessed with control. Any rash action could jeopardize the twins' safety. Instead, she reached out to her cousin Denise, a seasoned nurse with connections across the city's medical departments. Carefully, she explained the situation without revealing the girls' identities. Denise listened, stunned, but immediately grasped the gravity. She promised help and suggested bringing in a trusted speech therapist and a social worker to verify the twins' true abilities. Armed with Denise's guidance, Patricia planned a covert meeting with Dr. Jennifer Costa, a specialist who had previously exposed fraudulent diagnoses in children. Patricia's mind raced with logistics: the timing, the risk, the need to ensure the twins' safety. Every detail mattered. A single misstep could alert Richard, and the consequences for Emma and Sophie would be severe. That afternoon, as Richard buried himself in spreadsheets and conference calls, Patricia guided the twins through subtle exercises, reinforcing their ability to hear and speak without drawing attention. Each whispered word, each faint sound was a victory, a quiet rebellion against the years of fear and deception. Emma's eyes sparkled with tentative hope. Sophie's lips formed words that had been denied for so long. For Patricia, it was both exhilarating and heartbreaking. These were stolen childhoods, and she had become the only chance for them to reclaim their voices. By the time Richard returned, Patricia had meticulously prepared the first pieces of evidence. The office appeared untouched, ordinary, a mask over the storm of revelations brewing just beneath the surface. But Patricia knew the moment of confrontation was approaching. Soon, she would have to challenge the man who had abused his daughter's trust and manipulated their lives for his own gain. And when that time came, there would be no turning back. For now, she packed away her supplies, the twins' secret safe with her, and left the office with a steady, determined step. The war for Emma and Sophie's freedom had begun, and Patricia was ready to fight. The quiet tension in the office promised that every future step would carry weight, danger, and the possibility of long overdue justice. The morning sun had barely touched the glass towers of Manhattan when Patricia arrived at the Manning Corporation, her heart a steady drum of determination. Today was the day everything would change. Every careful observation, every whispered test, every subtle act of rebellion had led to this moment. She carried herself with her usual professional calm, the familiar weight of cleaning supplies masking the storm of plans and evidence tucked safely in her bag. Emma and Sophie, watching from the corner, sensed the shift. Their eyes, once hesitant and fearful, now glimmered with the fragile hope Patricia had nurtured over the past week. Richard Manning was already in the conference room, smug and absorbed in a discussion about quarterly profits with his board. He had no idea that the carefully constructed world he controlled was about to unravel. Patricia's phone vibrated with a message confirming the arrival of Dr. Jennifer Costa, Dr. Sandra Martinez, and 2 investigators from the Department of Child Services, all authorized by a court order she had helped obtain using the evidence she had discreetly collected. Her pulse quickened. This was no longer a test. This was the culmination of courage, strategy, and relentless determination. Patricia guided Emma and Sophie toward the room, speaking softly, ensuring every step was measured. "You are safe now," she whispered, feeling the twins' small hands clutch hers with trust and relief. "Everything is going to be all right." The girls, emboldened by her confidence, followed silently, their heads held a little higher, their voices ready to break through the years of imposed silence. When Richard saw them enter, his expression hardened immediately. "What is this?" he demanded, rising from his chair, his voice sharp with control and disbelief. "They are with authorized professionals," Patricia replied calmly, her voice carrying the weight of authority she had earned through careful preparation. "They need to be evaluated. You will not interfere." The subtle tremor in his jaw betrayed a rare crack in his cold demeanor, but he quickly masked it with indignation. Dr. Costa knelt before Emma and Sophie, covering her mouth to ensure no lip-reading influenced the results. "Can you hear me?" she asked softly. The girls responded instantly, their voices clear, melodic, and bright, the very voices that had been suppressed for years. Patricia felt a lump rise in her throat as she watched the moment of truth unfold. Sophie laughed, a pure, unrestrained sound, and Emma joined in, the sound bouncing off the polished walls of the office, shattering the years of silence. Richard's face went pale, his carefully constructed empire of lies crumbling with each word, each laugh, each revelation of truth. Dr. Sandra Martinez stepped forward, her presence commanding, documentation in hand. "Mr. Manning, we have evidence of child abuse, forced psychiatric hospitalization of Elena Manning, and deliberate misdiagnosis of your daughters. Hearing abilities. These actions are criminal." Patricia watched silently as the weight of justice descended upon him, the smug control he had wielded for years dissolving into helplessness. At that moment, the office door opened once more. Elena Manning, alive and free after 4 years of unlawful confinement, stepped in with her lawyer and nurse. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt to embrace her daughters. Emma and Sophie clung to her, sobbing and laughing in a symphony of reclaimed voices. Patricia's chest tightened with emotion. This was the moment she had fought for, the victory born of courage, intelligence, and unyielding compassion. Richard stood frozen, stripped of power, facing the consequences of his greed, manipulation, and cruelty. For the first time, silence surrounded him, not the obedient silence he had enforced, but the heavy, judgmental quiet of truth. Patricia, gathering her supplies for the last time, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She was no longer invisible. She was the guardian of justice, a witness to liberation, a protector of stolen voices. Emma and Sophie's laughter filled the room, echoing far beyond the walls of the 40th floor. Elena whispered gratitude through tears, promising a future of love, freedom, and truth. Patricia felt a deep, warm pride settle in her chest. This was more than victory. It was redemption, restoration, and the undeniable proof that courage, even from the most unexpected places, could rewrite a life. Months later, Patricia's story inspired systemic change, exposing corrupt medical practices and transforming child protection laws nationwide. Emma and Sophie thrived, free from deception, with voices as clear and bright as the hope that Patricia had never stopped believing in. Richard Manning, once a tyrant in polished shoes, became a cautionary tale of greed, cruelty, and the inevitable triumph of truth. And Patricia Williams, the cleaning lady, who refused to look away, became a symbol of courage, determination, and the extraordinary power of breaking the silence.